Welcome to IndoctriNation, a weekly conversation series about protecting yourself from systems of control. I'm your host, Rachel Bernstein.
Hi, everybody. Thanks as always to our supporters on Patreon who help to keep this show available as a public resource for those affected by cultic abuse. Thanks also to the few organizations who have stepped up to sponsor the show, and one of those organizations we are proud to be working with is the DeCult Conference happening soon in New Zealand. Today's guest is actually a featured lecturer at the event founded by Anke Richter, who you heard from as a guest here a few months back. Here is Anke again to tell you a bit more about the event.
Kia ora, I'm Anke Richter, who wrote the bestseller Cult Trip, and I'm bringing you an exciting event. Get ready for DeCult 2024, the first cult awareness conference in New Zealand, happening in Christchurch this October. Are you worried about a friend or family member who's in a group that may be causing them harm, or do you have your own story? Then join us for a weekend with experts from around the world, where those who've left cultic groups can share their experiences and meet professionals who can help them. Head to our website, decult.net, for all the info.
Thanks again to Anke and to DeCult for their support. If you are part of an organization that might be interested in sponsoring the show, please reach out to us at indoctrinationshow@gmail.com for more information. And now on to today's episode. Scott Homan was raised in the North Woods of Wisconsin, deep in the wild of the Great Lakes. Witness Underground, a documentary about artists escaping the Jehovah's Witnesses, is his debut feature film. His teen music community created Oh the Crib records in a house in the forest where they recorded 2 albums while being influenced by a cult. Today he runs Banana Island Films, which was born in Hanoi, Vietnam, during his 5 years there. He directed a heavy music scene film called Hanoi Mixtape as a kind of prototype for this project. Witness Underground is his first serious documentary and a much bigger project, which includes a YouTube interview channel and a series called XJW Coming Out. His projects have focused on artists escaping cults, demonstrating that self-expression shortens the path to healing after traumatic experiences. Witness Underground was just released on Apple TV, Amazon Prime Video, Tubi TV, and YouTube Movies. You can find links in the show notes of today's episode or by visiting www.witnessunderground.com. And for more information about the DeCult Conference, go to www.decult.net. Here is Scott now. I am delighted to be able to have Scott Homan with me today. You're going to be talking about a group that way more people need to know about. It's a group that I've been dealing with in the over 30 years I've been doing this work. It's had a longer history than that, but it's one of the first groups you hear about and learn about when you start doing this work in this field. And it's one of these groups also that has the benefit of having kind of mainstream status. And so people don't necessarily know what can happen and what it's like for people involved. And so I know you also have a lot of other things that you're doing and working on. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rachel. I love that we haven't said which the group is yet. There's the hook. You're going to find out in the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I remember finding out about when I was first learning about the group, people would come to me and say that they were having, as adults, they were having nightmares, they were having night terrors, they were having visions, they had so much fear. And they would ask me, is this usual? Is this typical when you've left a religious organization. And it can be typical, but it seemed to be even to a greater degree with this group. And I think that is naturally going to happen when you're talking about, destruction and the end times and having a lot of visuals that are connected, right? That are offered to children, which shows that there is, I think, very little awareness of child development and imagination and fear construction and what that does to the mind and feelings of safety. So, there are a lot of people who are kind of the walking wounded who were raised in this group. And that's why it's all the more important that you're talking about this so you can kind of normalize people's experiences, but also the after effects. So they don't think they're, experiencing something that's unique to them. I mean, it really can tie people together, knowing, oh, I have something in common with other people who have experienced this too and are continuing to experience this. So let us know a little bit about all the projects that you're working on. And then so we make sure that people have a sense of you and also just what your life is like and what you do, maybe even separate from all of this. And then we'll start talking about your story.
So I made a movie called Witness Underground, and just right off the bat, witnessunderground.com has all the links to all the places you can watch the movie. Some of them are for rent, some of them are for free with ads, and so go watch it. But this is like I spent the last 9 years of my life working towards this, and it just came out. So a big life goal. I've learned so much, and I've interacted with people like yourself in your profession, and also learned about my mental health and found some therapy modalities that work. I think through the process of making a movie on the topic of something so personal, I realized that I wasn't actually where I would like to be, or I'd missed some growth moments and needed some of that help you were talking about, where there's residual effects from cult indoctrination. And I like to say anyone who got out of this type of faith group successfully navigated cult mind control. But we didn't know that that's what we were doing necessarily. So what were those tactics and what are the residual effects that have been really impactful to after getting the movie, going to the film festival run and doing public speaking on the event, and then having panic attacks, or anxiety attacks while in public speaking. I was like, well, where did that come from? I didn't know that was a thing. So then I started seeking my own help with professionals myself. I'd wanted to make a movie. I kind of knew that intuitively back in 2010, right after getting out of this group. But I also knew that I was super novice and didn't have all the skills I needed. And so I kind of had this mission, I'm going to go learn filmmaking. It's been 5 years just doing completely unrelated topics, working with different directors and doing freebie, getting my own camera and being a B camera and then doing editing and then working on music projects and doing all this stuff that I had a deep, a personal interest in, but it was more light. It didn't have deep story. It didn't have anything attached to my personal story. But then I had this goal, one day I want to tell this heavy story. And at some point I met someone kind of randomly and I was like, let's just try it. Let's just do an interview where I ask you about your life. And it was sort of, we called it the XJW coming out story, following people who've come out of this story to use the LGBT language because there's such similar pathways. And the first couple of people I worked with happened to be a part of those communities. That came out twice. And then that just sort of became okay, this is my personal project. I'm developing my skills, developing the ways to talk about it. And then once I had a whole season of episodes, 10 episodes of that, some of them I released parts of. I hired an editor to help me, a real editor. So we had really nice stories that were 10 or 20 minutes long. And then I was like, you know what? I think I'm ready to do a movie. Let's crowdfund a movie. Because I was finding this community. So we crowdfunded what became Witness Underground. And that I thought I would knock out in a few months, but it takes a lot to make a movie. And then there's 10 crazy skill sets to learn when you're making a movie, release a movie. So I didn't know that. And I always wanted to run the film festivals, but I'd never been to one. So it was okay, I had this huge learning curve on many, many different things. So I figured it out, figured out all these steps over the course of, we did the crowdfunding in 2018 and released the film in 2024. So there's a 6-year time gap to meet the actual goal once I finally started shooting the movie, which is in 6 years of time, I had, 10 days of that was with cameras. So when it comes to film production, people think of like, oh, there's a film set and an interview and like that's what it is. But no, there's actually like 1,000 days of other stuff.
Right. Right. Wow. I think about this idea of you just saying, I want to make a movie and I'm going to learn how to do it. That's quite incredible. And then to work with people to learn the craft, to hope that then you can turn it into something that's going to make the kind of difference that you want to be able to make. And I think also tell the stories that you want to be able to tell in the way that you want them to be able to be told. And so what were you hoping was going to be different about this movie?
That is a great question because that's the goal, right? Like what was the initial inspiration? So I'd watched a lot of movies on the topic of this particular religion because my dad had joined it and tried to do like different phases of indoctrination throughout my young life. But I was like 8 years old when he started taking it seriously. My mom was very resistant. So I had like two different influences. So I had like a light version of it in a sense, but it still affected me. And actually, I think it affected me more after getting out than it did being in it. Because I sort of had this ability to kind of choose my own path in it. Got out, it was like full force of the punishment, which is like extremist shunning. It's like emotional abuse that never ends. Daily thing that they choose to do forever until everyone dies. So I haven't had a connection with my family now for 15 years.
Oh, okay. 15 years. Okay. And you can name the name of the religion. I don't mean to make it so cagey, like this big reveal. Yeah, go for it. You can talk about it.
The movie is about artists who escaped a cult. That's how I frame it. The people in the movie don't like that because there's people in the religion don't like that word, but ultimately you can tell your audience might be able to take your professional opinion on this, but from everything I've read, it's a cult by many, many factors. But the religion is Jehovah's Witnesses. Most people know them for knocking on doors and not celebrating Christmas or birthdays, but there's a lot more going on than that, and they do a lot of very dangerous things in your community that affect not just the people in it, but also the people that are around those people. But the inspiration was I'd watched all these movies about it growing up with it because I kind of had, if you're in it, you can't really do that. But because I had like a more neutral or like walking the fence kind of family dynamic and lots of people outside of the religion influencing me, I was like, oh, I feel comfortable doing that. They're making movies and publishing them. Other people are making movies and publishing them that are sort of like not pure propaganda. So I was watching all the media from both sides and trying to make a decision and navigate like, well, what is real and what's not real. But all the movies about the topic that were sort of not painting them in the best light, that the religion wasn't proud of, were also really accurate, I thought, as a person who was actually living it. I was like, well, they're not being dishonest. That's exactly how it works. That's not how we tell people about it. That's not the propaganda voice. That's just really realistic and honest. And then there's a lot of movies that were coming out, or a fair amount of like documentary style news kind of documentaries that were painting. Basically, they would like what I felt was exploitative of the pain that the person went through missing their family. And they would just roll credits. And I was like, well, that doesn't make me feel proud of my experience because it's not all terrible. Like there's all the groups like this, like have something that they're pitching that's actually a benefit. Like nobody actively joins a cult. They join a group that they think is better for their personal life and they get manipulated along that path and it consumes their life in a way that's unhealthy. And so I didn't like that they were always painted in this one way. And then it was like anyone who leaves is just now suffering and pain and we should feel pity for them. Like what a poor, sucker who was an idiot doing this thing. And it just didn't capture how I felt. It was like the most proud moment of my life to walk away from this thing and make my own future. And I totally accepted the fact that after a couple of years of it, that my family those relationships no longer existed. And that was worth it to me to be able to have honesty with myself and the rest of humanity to forge my own path forward, untethered from that community and even immediate family who I loved. But those relationships dissolved and are gone. And it was just like, well, I'm not going to lie for the rest of my life. But I wanted to show in a movie something that transcended that painful moment and that thing that the people in religion continue to do, which is the shunning and the emotional abuse, like transcending that and going and making a life you're proud of. I wanted to show that in a film. Like here's people who lost a lot. I lost those same things. I'm not in my movie. It's about another group of people. But those people lost a lot like I did. And then they found their voice through music and art. And that allows them to have this upswing immediately after getting out of that, where they're unfiltered and they're able to say what they want about their actual beliefs and their new philosophies on life and where they find meaning in life. We did what we could. I'm sure I could do something different now, all these years later. For you, it's a new movie. For me, it's an old story. I knew it from 2004. This was happening, and the movie we shot in 2018, but it's about their past already. Kind of looking back, and it has all this beautiful nostalgia from like short films and music. So we can go into like what the theme of the film is and like how it captures that. But that was my mission. Like, I want to show the life after, and like, how do we celebrate that?
Right. Okay. Oh, that's really well said. And yes, I want to be able to get into it and the music especially, and then come back to more of your experience growing up, but also this thing that you just said that I wrote down, which is that JW, they do dangerous things in the community. And I definitely want to be able to review some of those things. So tell me more about what is highlighted in the movie and also the whole musical theme of it.
Personal story that connects to the movie is I was growing up in a small town in northern Wisconsin, and it's the 90s, and I got into playing music. We had like a music recording studio. My parents bought the neighbor's house when the neighbor died, and all the kids that I knew growing up that played music, we all like shared that place like a studio. We could practice until 3 in the morning, and we often did, and had little parties. And we ended up forming a band that played prom, and then we did like a tour. We did an album right after high school, and it was really fun. And I never really met other witnesses who did music. So this is my non-witness community of friends, my normal high school friends. I had this moment where I didn't go to college, and I kind of left the religion around that time for like half a year. But then I met someone in the religion kind of randomly. My dad was influencing me to try to go back to religion, and I was like, I don't do these 10 things. But he's like, that's fine. Just come back and do what you want to do. It's like a very light version of the religion. It was just unprecedented. It's not normal. And because of that, I was like, okay, I'll go to church, but I'm going to do it where I'm living in Madison, Wisconsin, in a college town. And I met someone really cool. And they're like, hey, you got to check out this witness music scene in Minneapolis. And then years later, I moved there. I got to know some of those people. And it was like, wow, there's like, it's not just like, I didn't know there was cool witnesses. And like everyone I'd ever met in their religion, they kind of had left the religion already if they were my age. So I was like, somehow I was the only like holdout, even though I barely believed, like I only believed some of it. I wasn't fully indoctrinated, very skeptical. And so I discovered in a way, in my own weird way, roundabout way, that like, oh, there's like really interesting music happening in the religion, in this culture. And I had always navigated the two worlds. So I started going to their shows, and they had like a music festival, and I started like hanging out with them. And that became my community when I lived in that city in Minneapolis. And so yeah, I lived with these musicians, and like that, we started having kind of like a college experience in a way. We were sort of on the fringe. I was more on the fringes, and like my little people, the people that I found on the fringes. But so I was like on the edge of that community, but I started living with the musicians, and then we were like infiltrating that music culture, short films and music videos, like on all VHS, so like it wasn't like there was a mass availability of this. It was like just in the community, like they made a weird music video about cannibalism and like a trailer for a horror film that didn't exist, but it was all like lighthearted, goofy stuff, like Hitchcocky, like goofy. And so, yeah, it's sort of like, it wasn't too edgy, but it was very edgy for that culture. But like in the normal terms, it wasn't, it was just touching the boundaries. And it was really fun, and there was really vibrant art being made that I was really impressed by. And then a lot of those people, so this is what the film captures. So there's like a 3-act in the film. There's sort of like what was Nuclear Gopher music production studio? Like where they put out 30 albums of high quality music of like many genres, singer-songwriter, riot girl, some punk rock stuff, some indie rock, some psychedelic rock, some shoegaze. There's like more like noisy, ethereal stuff. Really, really good artists. And all these weird films. And so, okay, we're seeing the Jehovah's Witnesses through the eyes of these like fun, vibrant, but also like pretty tame people, but doing their creative outlet as teenagers and early 20-somethings. And then tragedy hits where someone has a unique thought for the first time, like maybe I should do some research here. And they do the research, and then they're pulling on the threads of science, as one of the characters says, and that turns into a thought crime, and then they get exposed for having their own ideas that are not religious ideas, and it's all these things happen that are really difficult. Like they pull the rug out from underneath this guy, and it's difficult. And then it's sort of like, who else gets influenced by that? And then there's something that happens in the religion normally, which is like when someone leaves the religion or gets kicked out, no one can talk to them. There's it's complete disconnect in communication. But because the bond in the art scene was so much more rich and real for them than the bond of, hey, we read the Watchtower or Awake magazine and we all meet at church on Sunday, that person wrote a blog about his new ideas and like his feelings and like how much it hurts to have like lost his connection with his mom or his dad or his siblings and his community and all the losses. And he wrote this blog, and all the other witnesses in the art scene were reading that blog secretly, not talking about it. But it was like they started thinking about a lot of those things and like how much it hurt to like mistreat that person and destroy their reputation on purpose, because that's what the culture needs you to do. And that's what you probably need to do, to just become sort of okay with having to treat them as like a hated person. That you have to, like, they're in a way a hate group, but they create their own hated community. Anyone who used to believe what they did, and they have to continuously do the hate to then make peace with themselves for disconnecting from their friend or someone that they loved. So then it's like, well, what happens? Then the movie kind of shows you what happens without giving it all away. But ultimately it's like, oh, wow, these are really impressive human beings. Not only do they make incredible art about their experience in the religion, which taps on all these moments of like mental health issues and like indoctrination and belief and identity. But then when they got out, it was like the can of worms was insane. And they made incredible art coming out of that, talking about that exact experience, like exit albums and like 3 albums about their exit process and like landing in a new worldview with a new identity that they've created. I'm so impressed by it. I want the whole world to experience that music and the art. And I'm so proud of the film. It's like, it was basically like an autobiographical experience of my life without me being in it, with a more dramatic scene, because like they were better artists than me in a lot of, and their losses were so much more dramatic and so contained into like a very short time period. And then the rise of them as like musicians on the outside is like rock goddesses and like doing really, really impressive, powerful art.
Wow. Okay. So, right. That's like a wonderful trailer for your movie. I want everyone to see it. And, having this whole idea of a thought crime is very interesting to me, because a thought crime, of course, this whole Orwellian idea about that is something that we deal with a lot, and you deal with a lot as you're, exploring this whole idea of what you're allowed to think, what you're not. In fact, there are times that I'll be interviewing someone or talking to someone who's gotten involved in like certain kind of political movements or conspiratorial thinking. And I have certain books that I use to raise my computer higher just for the camera. And one of them is 1984, which I use to put under. That's just my own sort of personal thing that I do. Well, I like to be able to see it as a way to remind myself that, we're living in that to a certain degree. And some of the things that I'm talking to people about, it's like there's nothing new under the sun kind of idea, that this is repeating itself in a scary way. But that often the thing that's considered a crime is the thing that threatens the group or the leadership, but isn't really a crime in and of itself. It's just critical thought, and it's exploration, and it's gaining access to facts, which is tremendously threatening. And what also is threatening is artistic expression, right? I mean, I think I've worked with a lot of people who were raised in groups who were told that they were not supposed to explore their abilities, their artistic abilities, their musical abilities. And that was all the devil, and or however it was talked about in their group. And in fact, there are some groups where kids are punished for imagining, that they're not supposed to have a dream that's other than how it's supposed to be, how they're supposed to think about things and the images that they're supposed to have. So I mean, that is pretty horrific. But at the same time, I really like that you were able to explore that part of you. And yes, a group is going to use it, I guess, at times for its purposes, or you're going to use it within the confines of the structure. To break free of that, I'm sure feels both liberating and anxiety producing, especially at first, if a lot of people who deal with the fears that there's something that's going to be punishable if they do something, live with the what ifs. Like, what if they're right? What if this is going to happen? And so some people will say certain things, paint certain things, play certain things, and then duck and hope nothing happens until over and over again, you have the repeated experience of having nothing happen to you except for joy. And then you realize actually it's not a bad thing and it's not dangerous.
Yeah. You brought up a point I wanted to touch on, which is kids can't imagine. And I learned this thing from starting to do some therapy where one of the tricks was like, okay, imagine a very peaceful place, an imaginary place or a real place that you have been. And who is there with you? Like bring in people that you value to that place. And it was strikingly similar to what the religion indoctrinates you to do early as a kid. And their imagery in the religion is often a very peaceful scenery, with people that your loved ones, or like the characters that are, they're all fictitious animations, but like you're supposed to like imagine that those are your dead grandmother or your ancestors or like your dead family member or some people that you are living with right now who survived the doomsday end of the world, murders everyone. These are the people that make it, and they're loved by God like God loves you, in a place that's like has a lake and everything's green and there's ample food and all of the animals at the petting zoo or even the wild, dangerous animals are there to interact with you in a peaceful way. And it's sort of like, okay, so that's the very first image they show everyone that gets pulled into the religion, and they show kids like, this is the thing you're allowed to imagine. So if you ever have, if you're ever scared or if you ever worried or have anxiety, you just go to that place that we have prescribed for you to imagine. And it's like, well, now that like professionals in your position are like, hey, if you're having this experience, you can go to this place. I'm like, that's difficult for me because I was told that place existed, but it's such fantasy that I don't want to actually do that same trick that the religion used. It's almost like they learned that, 70 years ago. And they're like, let's teach that to our followers. Like that'll get them to stay hooked. And so some of these modalities that are modern actually are like not useful to people who were kind of like tricked into using that or tricked by that same thing, which is also similar to communist propaganda. So you ever seen like a Soviet billboard, or even I was living in Vietnam for 5 years, which is a whole story, but all their propaganda, which is like classic communist, has that like happy family with like the wheat field, and they're in this beautiful tranquil place that has food and water. They're with people that they love and they're working together. And it's like, we're all working together for like a greater society, a utopia. So I grew up in essentially like a group that uses the same tactics as like a classic communism from the last century. To very effective. Yeah, it works.
Yeah, it does. It really does work. And I see, when you see these tracks, when you see the illustrations of all these, the multicultural, I always notice multicultural depictions of happiness and picnicking and whatever else. And then you hear about the disconnection and the abusiveness of it that happens behind the scenes, behind these smiling pictures. I was working also with a family a few years ago where the parents divorced because the father became Jehovah's Witness and the mom didn't want to do that. And so she brought her son in, who was 8 years old at the time, and they had just been through a whole nightmare. And the nightmare was that they had joint custody. And when he spent time with his dad encouraged him to bring the mom up on child abuse charges so that he could get full custody. And so he convinced his son this is what God wanted and to not disappoint God. So it was a whole nightmare. And there was a younger child too who was taken out of the home temporarily. I mean, it upset everything, the balance of everything, and emotionally speaking. And I think about those stories, behind this backdrop of all these smiling people. And supposedly, once we kind of got into what was happening here, this seemed to be something that Jehovah's Witness leader in that town was telling people to do, that either if they already were divorced, to bring the other parent up on charges, or to get a divorce based on that the other parent was somehow abusive. So there were all these false charges, and it was really traumatizing for everyone, but that there was this sense of entitlement. This is for the greater good somehow,
Any way to get him into the church and like get him dedicated through baptism, lie, cheat, steal, manipulate, even in the court of law where they even use the Bible, which I'm not a fan of in the separation of church and state, but they supposedly respect the Bible as like God's authority and word. But even in that case, they're willing to sometimes lie. Even the leadership have been shown to blatantly lie on a court of law with their hand on the Bible. Like that kind of stuff. I've heard so many stories that are similar to that, especially when it comes to child custody.
Incredible. And so I'm curious a little bit more about your experience growing up in your family and how many generations back does it go, and just getting a flavor for that history.
Yeah, so mine's a little bit atypical. Usually it's someone's born in and their grandparents were indoctrinated decades ago. But or they're the person that comes in because someone went to their door and they do a Bible study and like the slow manipulation, love bombing path. Whereas in my family's case, my grandparents retired in their 50s and moved far away to the other side of the country, like snowbirds from Wisconsin to New Mexico. And in those travels and new places, they didn't have communities. This is what one of the tactics of the religion is, like someone who lost someone in death, someone who's new with no community, someone who's a bit vulnerable. They're like, okay, this is an easy hook. Let's go. Let's see if we can get them to come to our church, and like we'll introduce them to our people, and we'll just gain them that way. And that worked on my grandparents. But I think in a way, for them, it was like, hey, it's community. This sounds great. And they seem like nice people. And, we've met all kinds. My grandpa was like involved in the circus and like car thievery, and then joined World War II to escape that. So he's had like some unhealthy situations. So to see a group that's like, they like don't use any drugs, and they have like strict rules around sex and like fidelity, it's probably like attractive as someone, and there's a bunch of other people their age to hang out with. But that influenced my aunt and uncle who were living down there. They had gone to Mexico. My aunt and uncle had moved there. So they influenced my aunt and uncle and those kids who I didn't really know. And then, I didn't even know my grandparents really because they lived so far away and I was young. And then they influenced my dad to start like checking it out. And like, you have kids, 4 or 5 kids at the time, like maybe you should raise them in a different community. There's one right in their hometown. So my dad started going and started studying the Bible with this group. It took years before he started like going regularly, and then trying to convince my mom to go. And then eventually sometimes we would go as a family. There's sort of this like weird thing where grandparents got it in like disconnected from their kids. And then my aunt and uncles got it disconnected from them. And then we were kind of raised already in the normal world in a sense. So our respective local cultures were all over the country. And then like I had this like dual family upbringing in it, where my mom still wanted to celebrate holidays, but sort of like, okay, we'll just cut those out, but we'll still do like lots of fun stuff that's like the holidays, or we'll do like the day after the holiday, we'll do holiday-ish things without like, we won't buy the thing that says Christmas on it, but we'll have all the Christmas candy, similar Christmas dinner with family on the other side. So we they kind of try to navigate, and they really were just working full time. So the amount of influence on us, like we never did home Bible study, which is like a standard in that religion here for the church sessions. We almost never went door to door, but sometimes we would, like once every few months or something. When my dad, 5 kids and 2 full-time jobs, like they barely tapped into that. And like we were sort of like always on the fringe of our local congregation, like, oh, they're the new people, like they get away with a lot. And also the influence from like my family who were Lutheran and non-denominational and Catholic. Their friends and my high school friends were like Pentecostal, atheist, non-religious, Catholic, etc., Methodist. So like, oh, there's different perspectives and like different holidays, respect. And like my grandma was babysitting, gay kids down the street. And it's like I had all those influences that gave me a more balanced thing. And then there weren't really influences my age. So all my friends were basically never a part of that cult. But yeah, that's the early days.
Wow. Okay. And so then as you were growing up in it, so, I think when people leave, it's usually something that has been brewing for a long time. And just to be able to have the courage to be sure enough that it's the right decision takes some doing and takes often many years. And so I'm wondering about just growing up in it and what you were feeling at odds with that's just started to grow and grow.
For people that are born in my experience with meeting them and listening to them, like it was so obviously like indoctrinated cult language. And I almost never would use the lines, like the special language and words. Like I would sometimes, but it would be forced for me. So people would often say like, this is the way of life. Like this religion is correct. The leaders are right. And where they're not, they self-correct and they call it the light getting brighter, which is to say like, they won't admit that they're wrong and they want to change an idea for whatever reason, self-serving reasons, or to keep the people on their toes. Like there's all sorts of, you look into cult dynamics, like there's always like this, keep changing everything to keep people feeling like it's fresh and new. They believe it all, basically. And if there's a change, okay, well, now I believe that. Like they just adopt the new thing. There's always a new thing like every 3 or 6 months. It's like, whoa, I can't believe they changed that. It's after 50 years of us telling people that that's how reality works. Now it's this other thing that wasn't true before. Now it's true. At some point, I had this realization, like there's not many reasons to be a part of this. There's like only a couple reasons to stay, because I'm pretty sure they're wrong about this and they're wrong about that. And they're incorrect about this. And they're not considering this nuanced angle or this really important detail on this other issue. And it ultimately came down to like, well, what is valuable here? For me was these two things. One was they seem to have the only path to immortality, which is their big sell, their hook. And the one thing that backs that up is Bible prophecy, which is all debunked at this point. 2,000 years of time has gone by. People have like analyzed these things, and probably the book was written after the event happened, not the other way around, which is what they tried to pitch in their storytelling. And so I was kind of hanging on to those two things. Like, okay, well, prophecy is really impressive. How do they know that thing? And the other religions, like not selling me on heaven and hell. Like basically Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in a spirit, a soul, or an afterlife. There's just your body, like basically the atheist view. So I grew up without any kind of afterlife spiritual belief system because Jehovah's Witnesses don't have that thing. They have you will live forever in your given body. I liked that idea. It was simple. It's kind of like materialist. It's like if we're Garden of Eden is real, that's the whole point of the earth. Like, so I liked that, and the other religions didn't have any, and they're really good at like pointing fingers at all these other religions. Like here's pointing the lens at Catholic. Well, here's how there's 72 ways that, Catholics are wrong. Here's the 40 ways that Pentecostals are inaccurate. And here's how they're interpreting the Bible incorrectly. I wanted to believe that the immortality thing was real, but I was super, super skeptical. And then eventually I, turned that lens of like critical thinking onto this religion kind of slowly, really. It was like, well, they're wrong about this. I don't like that they do that. And then I read some, critical literature on the religion that some ex-members had written when I was 19. And that was like, oh, wow, yeah, I have seen that dark side. And that is how we treat these people. And it is really, really unhealthy and mean and unloving. And they're disconnected from their family. And that seems wrong. Like the whole shunning angle, which is really Witness Underground, our documentary, is about shunning and exploring and kind of shining a light on like how dark and how evil that thing is. It also learned from people who were sexually abused as teenagers, and they confided in me. It's like, what am I supposed to do with that information? And I learned about pedophilia in a neighboring congregation. And then recently realized that like the ringleader of the child sex ring and married by congregation actually was moved to our congregation. He was like a family friend of ours. And I dated his granddaughter. And we had no idea at the time, but like she was also a victim of that same perpetrator, but she like had to go to the church every week, 3 times a week with the person who did the thing, the abusive thing that probably negatively affected her life and still does to this point. And like how much of, I kept on hearing these things. It's like, this is not a healthy group. And people are covering things up that need to be exposed. It's like, it's hard to say that because the risk, there's so many risks. Like even having that relationship with her, I had to keep it secret. And then when it got dicey, that maybe someone was realizing we had a relationship, I had to like cut it off. And then I was like shunning this person myself, who I actually cared about early on, like at 14 years old, that, there's all these things that are starting to happen where I was afraid of getting removed from my community. So this stuff, really affected me early. And it's a lot of like existential crises to happen that normal people don't think about until they're in their middle ages. That I'm thinking about at 10 to like 16 years old, and like not sure how to navigate it.
Yeah. So when you talk about this existential issue and existential angst and dread, yes, these are very, very heavy things for anyone. for most adults. And so as a child, as a teenager, I've also talked to many people who were raised in groups that talked about the end times, that talked about just things, it talked about Armageddon, that things were just going to sort of blow up, whether it's a kind of a more conspiratorial group or political group or religious group. And that there was this kind of wording change when you think about your future. And it wasn't what you want to do and when you want to do it, but if you're going to have a future, if you're going to be able to do anything, if you're going to be alive. And not knowing makes it hard to even envision something, makes it hard to plan for something and to even imagine what you might want to do because you don't know if any of it is a possibility.
Even things like go to university and get an education. The end of the world's coming in the next few months or maximum like 3 years. And they're always kind of hinting like, well, here's an indicator piece of data that points to if this is correct and this math over here is correct, and we use this strange Bible prophecy and this number and that number, and we multiply this, and that means we're in that end times, then we're like three years away from the end. And it's always like just the short term. So why would you spend the next 3 years learning something when you're not going to survive? Why would you save money for your future? Give it to God's leaders, on earth, because they know what to do. And that will give you a +1 to get into, to survive, Jesus murdering everyone they have this iconography of like Jesus with a bow and arrow, riding a horse with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse through the clouds, shooting arrows that are destroying like a mega city. And the people that are running from Jesus murdering everyone are like a mom with a baby and like a dad, like running for their lives. And they're not going to be saved. Those are not God's people. They're definitely going to die in the next arrow blow. Like that's the imagery we were shown as kids. That was what really affected me. But there's a lot. There's always like the earth is cracking open in an earthquake. And there's a lot of moments in the Bible where apparently God swallowed up tens of thousands of people that he didn't like that day because he's violent and he's jealous and he's all these negative traits. And it says it straight up. And it's like, and because he's jealous and you didn't worship him the correct way that day, you deserve to die. And if God kills you, you're dead forever. You'll never come back into the paradise. It was like how Jehovah's Witnesses interpreted it. So yeah, you're always like, yeah, it's not even like, do I have a future in this real world that I'm in right now with these people? No, these people that are around me are all going to be murdered by Jesus himself. And if I'm lucky, and if I just try to stay on the path that the cult has prescribed for me and rise up in the hierarchy and try to get some respect in the local congregation, just maybe he won't murder me too. And he's going to do all this stuff real soon. So don't plan for your future. There is no future. You're probably going to be killed by Jesus. That's always in the back of your mind.
Wow. Which is also, I mean, it's terrifying. And yes, all these visuals of the sidewalk cracking open and the fires of hell, all of it. It's terrifying. It's like like here, children, here's a horror film that I want you to read through, and good night. I mean, it's really very, very difficult for the psyche. The idea also that you have to worry about Jesus being homicidal is a whole other way of looking at Jesus. So there is this, I mean, because I'm not Christian, but I still picture Jesus sort of walking around in sandals being kind of cool. And so that's just me. But I think that there is this idea that also you're then separated in terms of your belief system, in terms of what you're fed from other believers, from other people who have a concept of Jesus, which is going to be completely different. So it's another, I think, way of feeling or becoming isolated. And so, people, I think, raised in Jehovah's Witnesses, you can tell me better if this is true, kind of feel like they're on an island unto themselves.
Actually, the language they use around other believers of any other religion, especially Christians, because that's their main beef with the world. Like they kind of don't even try with Muslims or Buddhists or atheists. Like they're like, those are all just lost causes, which is like, 70% of humans. But they call any Christian group that's not Jehovah's Witnesses Christendom, the world empire of false religion. And at the helm of all of those is Satan himself. And so all these people are misled by Satan if they're Christian, if they're Catholic, if they're Lutheran, if they're Pentecostal, if they're non-denominational. Methodist, Amish, whatever. They're all Satan worshipers and they don't know it. They're blinded by Satan himself. And like Jehovah's Witnesses are the only ones that actually have any real understanding of what the Bible says and who God really is.
Right. So one of the definitions, if we're going to talk about cult definition, just even touching on it for a second, is that it is a group that says it is the only, and it is the true, and it is the only place you'll have the answer, and it's the only place where you will be saved, and it's the only thing that's real, and everything else is false, and everything else is somehow dangerous, and we're going to protect you and save you. And it just breeds this dependency because you can believe that. Why wouldn't you when you're growing up? And so it is very isolating. And it can keep people from thinking about leaving because then you're going into this world that is run by Satan. So I don't even know how you have the courage to leave.
Yeah, it's actually a big question because I've spent a lot of time talking to people with my original project actually be coming out and then the ongoing podcast related to Witness Underground. A lot of people have not developed a new identity. And some people, especially if they've left the religion, but they haven't done a lot of the deconstruction and like rebuilding their worldview, like intentionally, whether they found Christianity to be valuable or atheism to be the right place or become a humanist or whatever the identity categories that are prescribed for us in society, or just have their own kind of independent worldview. Identity becomes this really big question. But I hear a lot of people that are more on like they seem to not have done full deconstruction. They're sort of like, I don't want to stay a Jehovah's Witness, but I don't really want to do anything else. But I think that Jehovah's Witnesses, they'll say something like this. I think the Jehovah's Witnesses are the only ones, or they have the best version of reality, or like they're the only ones they've got it mostly right, or something like that, where they're still sort of indoctrinated into that idea that they're the only path that's sort of like on the right. Which makes it sad when I hear that. I'm like, you haven't done, it's not like you haven't done the work. Like I'm somehow achieved some amazing status, but it's like, no, like there's so much more. Dive deeper, read a few more books, like break down someone built a world inside your head and you didn't have a choice in that. Go break down those walls and build what you think is valuable based on your experiences and your curiosities. Forge your own identity that's not just one that already was created for you, or even a thing that a lot of people get stuck in the world I'm from, which is, well, I used to be a Jehovah's Witness. But that's an identity now. It's like a former Jehovah's Witness or ex-Jehovah's Witness, or even, other groups, ex-Mormons, ex-Orthodox Judaism. Are you going to stay there? Are you going to live right there where you're always sort of looking back and pointing a finger at the thing behind you? Or can you like come to the present moment and be like, this is an incredible world I want to explore? Or like looking into the future, like I'm so excited about the next decade of my life because I have this whole mission I'm on because I found meaning and purpose and I'm driven to do this thing for myself or for like my community or for humanity in general or something.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a podcast guest who was on the show who said that he no longer wants to be defined by what he's not. I think it's a really important thing to know who you are. And to define that and to feel free to do it. And there isn't kind of a right or wrong answer. And it can also be something that transforms and changes over time because you have the right and the ability to have it not be static. And I think that's actually the only way to make it really accurate for your life because we do go through changes. And so speaking about changes, so the change that you made to leave, I'm sure that in terms of your family relationships and all of that, it really did impact, as you're saying, a lot of them. And so that happened in 2010, you said, right?
Actually, 2008 was when I left officially. Then there was like a couple year grace period, which we didn't really talk about, but my parents were sort of like opening up a conversation and I would share some emails and some social media messaging. And then there would be like all of a sudden my entire immediate family like were deleted me. And there used to be notifications for that on Facebook. This person's no longer your friend. And it's like, oh, really? What happened? And then like 4 months later, they would add me all back at different moments. And they would communicate like, oh, sorry, I did that. I feel really bad about that. And like, okay, well, why did you do that? Oh, I was really young and really stupid. And, at 23, but then at 23 and a half, it's like, I got deleted again. Well, okay, well, what was it this time? Because now you're older and less stupid, apparently. And then it's like, well, they went to a church convention where they said, you have to disconnect from your family all the way. There is no, they did some strong messaging about like, not communicating with people who left because it's dangerous, or God will, like, they see that, he sees that, so he'll punish you, or you might not make it into their future utopia, dystopia. And so that happened for like a few years, and then it was like complete cutoff, like intervention. My dad got involved, and everyone like agreed under the patriarchal structure that I'm not allowed to be communicated with by anyone in the family, no matter what, under any circumstances. That's basically been the maintained situation since about 2010, 11, somewhere in there.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I mean, the idea of being unfriended, then friended, then unfriended, and then just really being cut off, and it's based upon what the group tells them to do and what the latest thinking is from the group. It's reminding me of this idea by Robert J. Lifton that he calls doctrine over person, so that how you're taught to behave and to believe and what you're taught to do matters more than the person in your life, the relationships, and it dictates the relationship. And so there's this organization that stands squarely in the middle, and you can't like even make your way around at times.
It caused a lot of anger and frustration, and also disappointment and shame around my family being a part of that and acting that way towards them as individuals for a long time, until I sort of realized that, like, you said it perfectly, like the religion or the organization's in the middle of the relationship, coercing them. And so they have, when I have confronted them, because I have gone there when we filmed the movie, I was in the neighborhood. So I popped in and confronted them and just said hi. And in that time, individually talking to 3 different family members, parents and 1 sister, they all said at some point, I love you, but you can't be in my life, kind of thing. Which is, it's like, well, that feels good, kind of, but it also sucks that you think you're telling me you're coerced and you're not allowed to, and you can't for whatever your beliefs are. Because somehow I'm the source of this external source. I'll destroy your future, paradise options. And it made me realize that they're coerced and they're the real victims of this. Like, I'm so proud of my choice to be not a part of that thing and to not have to make that decision. I don't hate them. The opposite is true. And they say they love me, but they're doing acts of hate or this emotional abuse thing. And they would never see it that way. They think they're doing what's right. And they think that I will crawl back on my hands and knees and beg them to accept me again into an unconditional love situation, which I don't accept. I won't accept that. But they live with cognitive dissonance all day, every day. I mean, probably they don't think of me all day, every day, but they probably think of the way they treat their brother or child a little bit every week, I could say. At some point it comes up for them that they are making that choice, been making that choice daily or regularly for 15 years now. And that cognitive dissonance must be so uncomfortable and unhealthy mentally. Like, I feel for that part of what they're experiencing, because for me, it's like, okay, well, I have other healthy people in my lives. I've formed a whole new identity worldview, and I'm very excited about what I'm up to. And they are unhealthy. Maybe not because they are damaged, because they're, broken, but like because they're in an unhealthy situation. And I don't want that kind of unconditional love in my life. That kind of the tactics being regularly brought up and used to manipulate me or attempt to manipulate me. And I'm so happy to not have that in my life, whether it's them specifically or anyone else from that kind of religious group. It took me a long time to understand what's really, to accept that that's the reality. I was a bit kind of angry at them individually.
Right. Oh my goodness. Right. It happens so often that, people will not go to their child's wedding, let's say, whether it's because the child has left the fold or the child is marrying someone who is of the same gender, whatever the situation, in the hope that the parent not being there is going to cause a child to say, you know what, you're right. And that's just, I actually haven't heard about that happening, that it changes the child's mind. It just separates them from their family. And then they develop a new family. Then they find surrogates who can support them and not have conditional relationships with them. But I think you're right that because family relationships have a certain sanctity to them and they're very primal, there must also be moments where they're really feeling trapped where they can sense it, that they wish they could have you in their life and they don't feel right about it, but they might feel like they don't have a choice, at least not yet.
Yeah, I've had the denial of access to a sibling's wedding where I knew I was being denied access. So I wrote them a kind letter saying, hey, I would love to celebrate this special day for you. And I got really nasty voicemails and emails back that said, if you do show up to this wedding, you're not invited. But if you do show up, we have 5 people who have agreed to be bouncers for you showing up at the door, and we'll call the cops and it'll make a huge scene. And is that what you want to bring to your sister's wedding? It's like, well, no, I don't want any of that. So I kindly asked if I could attend in support of it. I'm not coming to like fight you. This isn't like Satan versus God situation. I'm asking to support this moment for you because I don't know your husband or your fiance, but you're my sister, whether we're disconnected or not. That is just the situation we're in. I would like to support it. And it was like, absolutely not. And I got all this hate.
Right. I mean, also, it's the whole kind of it's opposite day kind of idea that you wouldn't be there to cause a problem if you were picked up by both elbows by, big people and thrown out. They would be the ones causing drama. But it's often the other person who is seen as the cause of the problem in the group in general. That's true for almost every kind of controlling group. And also that if you're just trying to show love now and support and connection, that you're creating the problem. And so you need to stay away. But it really is their reaction to you that would be causing the issue. It's head spinning, and it's hard to, I think, hold on sometimes to the clarity of knowing who is the one causing the problem.
Yeah. I've since in the last few years found myself in some unhealthy romantic relationships that I realized, I started doing research. I'm like, okay, so I think these are like narcissistic behavior patterns. And I'm like drawn to these people because it's familiar. So I'm recognizing that about myself after doing lots of research, that these people, were broken for their own reasons in some way, that they have developed these unhealthy patterns. Well, where did I get that? Where did the familiarity come from? It's like, well, was it my own parents or was it the religion? And probably it's a combination of the way that group and similar groups probably operate, that they reward these manipulative behaviors and they teach you to do these manipulative behaviors to the point that it feels normal to do acts of abuse to other people. So I'm not attracted. I see it and I'm like, I know how to navigate that. I can walk on those eggshells. And then I get in it. I'm like, oh, I've been here before. This is terrible. How did I get in this situation? Well, like I picked the one person out of the room that was the most familiar to me to go and talk to. And I was sucked into their web of chaos because I'm used to it, or I was used to it. And now I look at these family relationships and I'm like, anytime I interact with them, it's something like that again. And I'm like, no, I'm trying to find stable humans to be in my life.
Uh-huh. Right.
It's interesting because I'm like, I thought I was like, I'm the most intelligent person in my family. I have successfully navigated mind control and manipulations. And I've gotten out. I've forged this whole life for myself. And I'm so happy about that. And then I'm like, oh, but I'm also like, I have avoidant attachment stuff that I learned from unhealthy behaviors I grew up with. And I have these negative, unhealthy relationships that I'm drawn to. And, I've been out of this thing for vast majority of my adult life, but all these pieces of like just now realizing that I need to like go work on this internal stuff because I'm just seeing it for the first time. Like how many more people like me haven't done that in their aging adults? Like I guess this is your world. Like maybe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. So, yes, it happens more often than not. Exactly as you talk about it, that when you're raised in an environment that also it has a very superior way of looking at the rest of the world. We're the best. That permeates. And then also with having people who are never wrong, having people who never admit that they're wrong, that then the quote, the light is getting brighter. Really? How about just say, yeah, whoa, so sorry. Whoops, my bad. Right? Right? Why is that so hard? Right? Just be a grown up. But no. So it also has so much to do with who runs these groups. That's also sort of, I call it like trickle down narcissism. It's sort of built in like to the whole system, like a pyramid scheme of narcissism.
Oh, man. I'll use that.
And so I think that you feel it. And yes, it is familiar. Yes, it is. I think it's well said that you kind of self-corrected where you said, it's not that I'm attracted to them. It's not. It's just familiar. And you know how to play that role and you know how to kind of get it right. But do you want it? Is it healthy? Do you deserve it? Do you deserve something better and different and more open and more respectful of you? Because it is hard to be around that personality, as familiar as it is. But you also get lost in it because then you don't matter and you need to matter. But I know we have just limited time left. I want to be able to hear about Vietnam. I want to be able to hear about what you're doing now, et cetera, et cetera. And I know that means running through some big moments in your life quickly, and maybe we can talk again and continue the conversation more at length. But just so people know that you had this big adventure.
Yeah, so I got into religion, and my girlfriend at the time was in the religion. Just to make it short and sweet, there's a whole lot to talk about, but I kind of had this moment where I was like, this is what I believe. I love you and I want to continue the relationship. And she did her own research. Then we decided to sell all our stuff and travel. So while we're like deconstructing our religion, like learning all this stuff, we did like 6 months from South Mexico to Ecuador overland travel. And that was incredible growth happened there. I went to college after that. We went back in the States for engineering because it was the heart of the recession. So I went back to school and I did some mentor apprentice work. So I got another career. So I've been doing like camera work, went to school and a lot of odd jobs because like Witness don't really have a college track, even though I did go to school. It was like, you can't go to school. So like find another way. I did a lot of master apprentice. This is like I'm going to read a book about, or a chapter of a book at least about that. Like how do you navigate a world where you kind of don't have certain options that most people do? But I found this mentorship with engineering track. And then I sort of had this break where I was like, I don't like any of the engineering work I'm getting. It still pays terribly. And I was still pretty novice. And I was like, you know what I really want is I want to pursue this path for filmmaking. And I also want to live abroad. And those are like difficult to do, both of those things. But I was like, it doesn't matter where I go. And a friend of mine had this option to teach English in Vietnam. And I just said yes to it. And it's like 2 weeks notice. And I sold whatever I had at the time again and just went for it with a camera and, found people there that did filmmaking, a French filmmaker, a Vietnamese American filmmaker, and they became mentors. So I did this whole mentor apprentice thing again. I was like learning faster directly. And like, instead of the college track, I had like 5 years of like working underneath directors and filmmakers there. And then I started my own project with music and that learned a lot of editing skills. So I did like the visual arts and audio engineering, like self-teaching path underneath these people. And then at some point, and they guided me a lot in like story, which I didn't have. I didn't really know story. And I did this film about music there. And I was sort of like, I knew I was doing that for fun and like learning. Like I'm going to put this together because I know this bigger story I want to tell. And I like jokingly call that my Dagobah period. So I went to where Yoda went to the swamp planet. Like I went to the rainy monsoon in Vietnam, which just doesn't make any sense to anyone when I tell them to learn filmmaking hands-on. And back to the States, knowing exactly what I was going to do with the project and that I wanted to, really launch it out in the world and do a proper film. And I would knock it out in a year. I knew I was going to work with the people that became people in the movie. And then I also had some engineering work that was starting to pick up at that time. It was like 2015 until recently, doing like neuroscience and aerospace hardware that went on the ISS and some satellite flight electronics and some electric vehicle electronics. And I've sort of been doing some odd jobs at that since, while also I dedicated the last 2 years of my life to really get the movie out there. So I learned the last few things about distribution and now I'm in the marketing, the final phase, just marketing. You're a part of that. So maybe that wraps it up a little bit.
So I also want to ask you about the conference and things coming up.
Yeah.
Go
So
ahead.
Anko Richter wrote a book called Cult Trip, and it's a very good book where she visits 4 cults, and she has now started a group called DeCult, the Cult Awareness Conference in Christchurch, New Zealand, where she resides. She's German, but she's been there for a long time in New Zealand. And there's a lot of cults in New Zealand. And it's interesting because New Zealand's sort of like if you had a biodome or like a space station on the moon or something with like a certain limited amount of humans. Like when people leave a cult, they show up in your neighborhood. They become your neighbors. And the people are like really aware of these groups in New Zealand, where like here in the States or other countries, they might just like go off into some, they do drugs or become homeless or like get lost in society or who knows what happens to them. But in New Zealand, they're right there in front of you. So there's a lot going on there and there's a lot of media about the topic. And she's inviting a lot of the world's experts and a lot of authors, a lot of women that work in the space, and the ICSA, people that work at ICSA. And I've gotten involved where I've offered to use my YouTube channel, Banana Island Films, to interview some of the experts that she's having her panels. Is like, here's an introduction to the person, but buy the digital ticket to the conference or come to Christchurch. And she invited me when we did our big Kickstarter to release the movie last fall, early winter, to speak at the event on a panel of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and to show the movie as a premiere in Australasia, which is our first big international premiere at a nice theater there. So I'm going to be doing that. And I just said, yes, like it's a year out. I'll do it. Sounds great. Thank you so much. And I'm going to go there and be on a panel. So I'm really excited. I've always wanted to go to New Zealand, and it's going to be like, I've met a lot of these people now. I've been doing the interviews like this, and really, really impressive people, lots of authors, lots of expert podcast hosts. And I'm really excited for what she's doing. If you get a chance to check it out, it's a great organization. She's great. All the team has been excellent to work with.
I'm glad. I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to be there. She asked me to be a part of it, and I just can't swing it this year. But maybe if there's another conference, another time, and that would be great. Yeah, Anka and I have known each other a long time. She's wonderful, and she really highlighted how traumatic it can be, not only to be in a cult, but the experience of it, just because she got traumatized just from researching a cult. So that just tells you, even from the outside, being exposed to certain kinds of teachings and acknowledging the things that went on within a particular group, especially to children, can be traumatizing in its own right. And so people who jump into this, who like do the work that you do, where you're facing things, where you're really highlighting things. And so I want to thank you so much for being on the show and for doing the work that you're doing. Where can people find what you are doing and your film, etc.?
So witnessunderground.com is the place to watch the movie. Everywhere in the world, there's an option, and some of them are free, especially in North America, they're free. Yeah, bananaislandfilms.com has like kind of everything I'm working on. It's my creative, open-ended creative playground, but witnessunderground.com for the film. And then if you want to watch my Hanoi movie about music, which is very light and just like a fun celebration of art, hanoimixtape.com.
Oh, awesome. That's so awesome. Scott, it was such a pleasure to talk to you. I hope we get to do it again.
It's been a pleasure.
One more thing before you go. Thank you to Scott for all of his interesting work, and also from the talks that he gives about his experiences and how relatable he is and how much he is able to get into the heart of being an artist, being a musician, being anyone who wants to be involved in self-expression, and what it does to be in an environment that tells you that that is only going to lead you astray, and how nervous you can be of your own talents, your own skills, your own interests, and how much conformity is the name of the game, not individual expression. It is certainly a dangerous thing to squelch someone's creativity. It makes them feel like less of a person, if that is their natural proclivity. He talked in an interesting way about doing dangerous things in the community. And when you're a Jehovah's Witness and you need to be going door to door, or you need to be out somewhere selling your stuff. I know here in Los Angeles, there are many people out on many street corners and in parks and kind of all over the place, in airports, who are from Jehovah's Witnesses. And there are some times that people will approach them, other times they just walk right by. But either way, it's sort of hard to gauge if the people selling these booklets and books are kind of enthusiastic about the life that they're living, or if they just feel a sense of obligation. I also know that there have been times that I have seen people setting out a table in an area that is not safe, in an area where you wouldn't normally be walking down the street at night, and here these people are out sitting at a table or standing at a table, waiting for people to approach them. a lot of people I've talked to who were involved in groups where they felt that they had God's protection while they were there ended up doing things that really put them in harm's way. Sometimes they were harmed, and other times, just by the grace of, I think, luck, they were not harmed. But people look back at the dark alleys they walked down, and they look back at the times they did something on their own for hours at a time in the hope that they could sell something or they could recruit someone, and really had this sense that everything was going to be fine because God had their back. And that's not necessarily the case for some people, where they are harmed because they're left to be in dangerous situations in order to peddle the merchandise of the group, or to peddle the group and involvement in the group as merchandise. And they have really been thinking about how they felt that they were protected. And so they made decisions that now they know better to make. Now they would really be able to evaluate, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? And then this added layer of a lack of protection comes from this notion that if something does happen to you that shouldn't have happened to you, but they put you in this sort of magical thinking that it would be okay to put yourself in this dangerous situation or dangerous location, that if something does happen to you, they don't have to take responsibility for it. Or maybe it was God teaching you some kind of lesson. And either way, there's some reason for it. And it reminds me of what Scott was talking about, how they just don't admit when they're wrong. And if there's a change in something that they're saying or something they're predicting, he said they self-correct and they say, the light is getting brighter. So we were able to turn things around and now everything's good. In fact, it's even better. So this is where you have people who make these false predictions, and Jehovah's Witness has a history of predicting the end of the world over and over and over again for dates that have long since passed, and everything was perfectly fine the next day. But in the meantime, people really did have a panic that the world was going to be gone, and some people really did sell their property or did what they needed to do, feeling that the world was going to be imploding or exploding. And so here you have an organization that just doesn't take responsibility for that, and then has, I think, the hubris to over and over again predict something that is very easy to debunk. All you need to do is wait for the next day to happen when they said it wasn't going to happen. It's kind of easy to prove false. All too easy. I think that's why they're ready with this next part of it, which is, that's because we were able to turn things around, or we were able to bring more people into Jehovah's Witnesses, and that saved the world, or God decided to protect us. But this idea of the light is getting brighter after they have self-corrected, after they've kind of driven people crazy, after they've made them feel panicked, after they may have had, as I've heard from some people, may have had them drop out of school, because why continue if the world is not going to continue, and made decisions that really affected people's lives, I think sometimes permanently, that you have this weaving in of toxic positivity. And the toxic positivity is this idea that we've talked about on the show, just about how you can always find something good to say about something that has happened. And sometimes people will see that as just being positive, but the toxic part is that it doesn't offer any kind of solace for the way that they have turned your life upside down in the process. And it doesn't really make a person who has made false promises feel they're at all responsible to feel guilt or have remorse or even to apologize, if they can just step back and say, well, this is all for a reason. And so when you have this toxic positivity, it's also very hard to know what to do with the emotions that are bubbling up inside of you, like the ones where you might be feeling frustrated or angry, resentful. Because if you just keep hearing, well, it's all for your benefit or it's all part of God's plan, where are those feelings supposed to go? When during COVID, I started getting texts from my local Jehovah's Witness representative. I didn't know I had one, but whoever would often come to my door, I guess, was then seen as my neighborhood's representative. But that they weren't going door to door because they didn't want to get sick, but instead managed to get a hold of everyone in the neighborhood's cell phone number and had the audacity, I think, to text us all and give us some kind of tract that we needed to memorize that was in the New Testament, all about health and healing and all about God protecting you from disease and from illness. And then I got a follow-up text the week later asking me basically if I had done my reading. Like it was some kind of homework that I needed to have ready by the time this person was in touch with me again. But then, a couple weeks later, the COVID numbers went down just slightly before they spiked again. And there he was, at my door, wanting to follow up with me. I never asked this person to be in touch with me, and I never wanted to do any kind of reading about this, but he was very invested in trying to save me. But then, because he was suddenly going door to door again, he was putting himself at risk. The Jehovah's Witnesses had decided when it was safe for him to go back going door to door. No one was doing anything like that at the time. Almost everyone was still working from home. And I can only imagine that he caught something at some point, and I hope it wasn't too serious. But as soon as they felt that he could go back out and meet people face to face, they made him do it. And he may have felt that he was protected. And if and when he got COVID, and I'm assuming he did because of visiting lots of people's homes all day, and if he got sick, then it would somehow all be part of God's plan or a lesson or something. But they still wouldn't have to take responsibility for the fact that they put him back out face to face with people with something communicable running rampant in society and all over the world. But that they might have to put it on him that maybe he did something wrong. Maybe this was a punishment or a lesson for him. Or maybe this was just the kind of sacrifice he was supposed to make, and it was going to make him seem even more devoted or even more healthy. But either way, he was a human being who was put back in harm's way. And that's unconscionable, and it's really wrong. And it's really, I think, heartless, ultimately. I am so happy that Scott is able to be himself now. And he's able to further his own goals and express himself the way he chooses to express himself and is able to have joy. Thank you so much, Scott, for coming on the show. Take good care, everybody.
Thank you very much for listening. Please support IndoctriNation on Patreon at patreon.com/indoctrination. Be sure to give us a follow on our social media. Find us on Facebook and Instagram using @IndoctriNation Podcast. And for Twitter, find us at @_indoctrination. We love hearing from you too. So send us an email at indoctrinationshow@gmail.com. And for more updates on the show, visit our website at www.podpage.com/indoctrination.